666.
President Biden will release 50 million barrels of oil from the SPR, of which 32 million will be an exchange of oil that will be returned in the years ahead, and 18 million will be the acceleration of the sale of oil previously authorized by Congress. This is done, Richard, this is a very complex and very deep topic. I'm very excited about it. This is done really in response to pump prices in the US, which are up 61% from a year ago. They're not astronomically high right now. It's really the rate at which they rose that is causing some alarm and causing some political stress for President Biden. The SPR itself is its own issue that's really cool to talk about. It's a complex of 4 sites with deep underground storage caverns created in salt domes, and those are located along the Texas and Louisiana Gulf coasts. Right now, the SPR has 604 million barrels of oil, a balance of both sweet and sour crude. And the SPR's original existence is unfortunately tied to Saudi Arabia. The SPR was set up 40 years ago in response to the Arab oil crisis of 1973. But it doesn't really, Richard, appear like this is going to make a huge impact on oil prices. It's sort of a political decision. Let's talk about the SPR and oil prices.
I think you laid that out nicely. And I would only add that one of the notable things about this was it was done sort of collaboratively with China, India, Japan, South Korea, and the UK. And the estimate is that there'll be 100 million barrels put into the system. And it's especially significant because China and India aren't part of the International Energy Agency. So this is a coordinated release. Like you say, 100 million barrels overall, 50 million from the U.S. Estimates estimate that it could reduce the price of Brent maybe $6, which would effectively translate into a gasoline savings of about 10 cents a gallon.
Nice.
Sometime in December, January. So I have a particular perspective on this. I think and you nailed it. So the gas prices, the gas prices were $2 per gallon in April 2020. Obviously, this is the pandemic hit in March. It's, as you say, it's up. But everything I think you need to know. Let me read this quote about the circumstances. So just 43% of voters approve of Biden's job performance, according to an analysis of polls by 538. And the Washington Post ABC News poll published earlier this month found that 7% of Americans regard the economy negatively, despite substantial growth in employment and economic output under Biden. The U.S. Consumer Price Index, inflation, has increased 6.2% last month from October 2020, the fastest annual pace since 1990, so 31 years, which you alluded to. While economists believe rising inflation is due to unprecedented consumer demand following the pandemic shutdowns, Republicans have blamed Biden and his economic policies. So, in my opinion, I think this is a political move. I would add that the issues with gas prices, right? And a lot of that has to do with refiners, U.S. refiners, taking production offline. So again, back to April 2020, sudden drop in consumption, lockdowns, remote work, as we said, $2 per gallon. And oil refiners cut their production by nearly 40%. It went from a peak of 1.8 million barrels per day pre-pandemic to 1.1 million barrels per day in May 2020. Some of those refiners shut down plants. So basically, overall refining capacity shrunk by 4.5%. So while they're offline or they're throttling back production, gas demand has gotten back to pre-pandemic levels and has been chugging along pretty well. And so the glut is now gone. It's now gas inventory is down 6% lower than pre-pandemic levels. So the U.S. industry and the U.S. gas industry needs about 6 months, maybe a little bit more, to ramp up to previous levels of production. So the EIA has already said, look, the gas prices will peak in November. and they will fall steadily for the following year. And any long-term dip in prices will likely be driven by an increase in refinery production rather than one-off sales from national reserves or slow-moving regulatory investigations. So one-off sales from the SPR. That's what the EIA says. So, the market was working itself out. I think President Biden is in a tough spot because inflation in particular is really hard on lower income or fixed income. So it's very hard to stand by. On top of that, he's getting really pinged for the economy and for inflation in particular. And gas prices is particularly prominent in terms of consumers' minds, a prominent part of inflationary costs because everything else is up too. So I think I think he needed to do something. I think the markets had already priced that he would do something into it. So that's why the oil prices didn't change much. I think he sort of, it's a little bit of a misdirection because as we talked about last time too, in terms of oil production, U.S. oil production is picking up. The Permian had its highest record last month, highest record output ever. So 4.953 million barrels per day is expected actually in December. My apologies. So oil production is picking up. This was going to work itself out. Just politically, we didn't. The president didn't have time to wait on it. What I worry about and what I don't like to see is a sort of OPEC plus versus IEA plus. This sort of constructing a drama here now. What is OPEC plus going to do? They have they're talking. They have in place slow ramp up. Their forecasts are worrisome to them in the sense that they see COVID restrictions returning in Europe. They don't want to get too far ahead of it and oversupply the market. Now the question is is it on now between Saudi Arabia and the U.S.? I think it's just I just think it's unfortunate. I also think that the SPR, this draw, will not make, as you heard the numbers, 10 cents a gallon. Starting in mid to late December, it's not going to make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too. I mean, you mentioned the word political. I mean, this is a political tool. It's an economic tool if it were used in the way that it were designed to be used, which is to prevent an energy shortage or prevent another Arab oil embargo where you have gas lines around the corner. Not really to save Americans a few bucks. So it's sort of like President Biden made this decision knowing that it wasn't going to be a huge impact. He would get some criticism. The market had already sort of priced this possibility out anyway, but doing nothing makes President Biden look like he is powerless. And he, in a way, is powerless, but it's sort of a symbolic thing. I mean, at least it seems like to me. But the SPR was created for emergencies, so it's interesting to see it being used in this way, and it has been used in this way in the past.
Well, as you mentioned, please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I mean, as I understand, it's basically been used. It was used when a significant percentage of Libyan production went offline, and it was used during Katrina. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the first time it's been used this way.
Yeah, and I mean, oil prices are high. They're not at their highest. Right. And like we were talking about earlier, it's really the rate in which they increased from last year. But a very interesting decision that he took. I do want to mention the SPR is actually a really cool engineering construction. It's 4 sites, and they're storing these between 6 million and 37 million barrels of oil in salt caverns, which are along the coast. And the reason why they use these salt caverns is because they connect to all the different pipelines and maritime terminals for crude oil distribution. So they're strategically placed, and all of the oil is sort of underground where it's safe from attack. It's also cheap to store oil in these salt caverns. They repair themselves easily just because of the type of stone that is surrounding the cavern really, really cool stuff. It was really fun to look into this. But right now it's sort of like this announcement came and oil basically stayed at where it was going to be staying at for a while. And so, right before Thanksgiving, it's interesting because now there's this, okay, when you're around the table, well, he's working on it. He wants to get these prices down. He did this. It's just sort of, it's a very interesting situation. It's not like reaching into a bank account that you have and putting money right on the table saying this is ready to go. This oil will take some time to work its way into the system. And so it's obviously not all the SPR. So, a very, very interesting topic.
And it is interesting. And I would add that, and you noted that 50 million barrels, 32 is going to have to come back in. So they're going to have to go back and repurchase this 32 somewhere down the line. 18 million barrels is regular, part of a regular drawdown that's scheduled. It was going to be released in the coming months because they have regular drawdowns mandated. And the other thing is as I understand it, the predominant type of crude is going to be sour, so high sulfate content, and that's not really preferred type in terms of refiners. So again, it is. I think it's politics and it's necessary, I guess, from President Biden's, and it makes it a little thing. I hope OPEC Plus doesn't overreact. I think there are people there are countries within that 23-member group, obviously Saudi Arabia, and then Russia outside of it is the most important player. But UAE doesn't want to they don't want to cut back on increased production. There's a number of others that want to keep going. So I assume those voices will prevail, and they'll just have a meeting in early December, and it will be normal. Let's not get contentious or confrontational about all this.
Richard, what a difference 18 months makes. With the Russian-Saudi oil spat right at the beginning of the pandemic, oil tanked. Looking ahead 18 months from that, we're in this position. It's kind of amazing that Saudi Arabia had the patience it had to say, okay, everybody calm down. We're going to work on this. We're going to get everybody together, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all of OPEC plus. It's going to take a while to get the price back up, but they did it. And now we're in the situation where they're getting heat from, the U.S. government saying, hey, the prices are getting a little too high. Would you mind, scaling them back a little bit? And it's just interesting.
And as we know, President Trump jawboned the OPEC Plus into, prices were too low. So cut back production, and because prices are too low. I mean, so you got one, you've got a message from one and a message from another. The other thing about the difficulty with President Biden is, he's a proponent of climate change initiatives, and we've just finished COP26, and I think he was very committed to these goals. So it's a difficult position to be promoting that perspective and then saying, okay, we need to increase fossil fuel production.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a lot on our podcast, which is just a really interesting sort of head-to-head. Are we going to be pumping more oil and having cheap oil now, or are we going to start moving to clean energy? And
can we?
And can we? Yeah. So, very interesting.